He saved the royal bloodline. Now the Queen calls him one of us. The ship was already on fire when Corporal Dale Rourke pulled himself through the emergency hatch. Not metaphorically on fire. Not alarm fire. The port engine housing had taken a direct plasma strike, and the entire rear section of the Terran escort vessel was venting atmosphere and burning at 3,000 degrees. Dale had 4 minutes before the structural integrity failed. He knew because the ship told him so, calmly, in a recorded voice that sounded like someone's grandmother reading a grocery list. 4 minutes. He was not supposed to be on this ship. He was a last-minute replacement, a grunt pulled from standby rotation when the original escort team came down with a respiratory outbreak 3 hours before launch. Nobody briefed him properly. Nobody told him the cargo was alive. Nobody told him that inside the pressurized holding chamber in Bay 7, there was a child. Not a human child, an Ilvari child. Dale had seen Ilvari twice in his life. Once at a diplomatic summit broadcast on base television, where they stood tall and silver-skinned under the lights like they had been carved from something older than rock. The second time was a classified briefing photo, which he was not supposed to have seen, showing what Ilvari soldiers looked like when they were not being diplomatic. That image had stayed with him. The child in Bay 7 was neither of those things. She was small. She was terrified. She was pressed against the far wall of the holding chamber, with her knees pulled to her chest, and her silver skin had gone the pale gray color that Dale, with zero medical training in alien physiology, somehow understood to mean she was going into shock. The bay door had jammed. Smoke was curling under it. Dale had a field multi-tool, a fire suppression canister rated for 20 seconds of use, and the 4 minutes that were now 3 minutes and 40 seconds. He used the multi-tool to bypass the door lock. It took 90 seconds because the panel had warped from the heat, and 2 of his fingers were burned before he found the manual release. The door screamed open. The smoke rolled in with him. He hit the suppression canister first, sweeping it across the room, buying them visibility. The child flinched from the noise and pressed harder into the wall. Her eyes were enormous. They were the color of deep water, the kind of blue that existed at the bottom of things. Dale held up one hand, palm out. He did not speak Ilvari. He did not speak any Ilvari dialect. He knew approximately 6 words of the trade common language used at border stations, and 2 of them were directional and 1 was a number. He pointed at himself. "Dale," he said. She stared at him. He pointed at the smoke curling along the ceiling. He pointed at the door. He pointed at her, then at himself, then at the door again. She understood. She did not move. Dale checked the ceiling. The suppression foam was already thinning. The structural warning in his earpiece ticked down. 2 minutes 50. The ship groaned beneath his feet, a deep metallic sound like a mountain deciding to fall. He crossed the room. He crouched down in front of her so that he was at her level. Up close, she smelled like cold rain and something mineral, like wet stone. Her breathing was shallow and fast. Her fingers were pressed flat against the wall behind her. He did not grab her. He did not pull her. He simply stayed crouched at her level and held out his burned hand, palm up, open, and waited. 7 seconds passed. She put her hand in his. Her fingers were longer than human fingers and cooler than he expected, and they closed around his with a grip that surprised him, because it was not the grip of a frightened child. It was the grip of someone who had decided to trust something even though everything around them was on fire. Dale stood up, and she came with him. He moved fast through the corridor, one arm shielding her from the worst of the heat, navigating by memory and by the emergency strips that were still lit along the lower edge of the floor. The ship was listing now. 2 minutes, 12. He could feel the vibration in the walls that meant the secondary coolant system had blown. The escape pod bay was 60 meters from Bay 7. In normal conditions, it was a 90-second walk. The conditions were not normal. A section of ceiling panel had collapsed across the main corridor. Dale pulled the child back, assessed, chose the maintenance crawlway that ran parallel, got them both through it on their hands and knees with the heat pressing down from above. She did not make a sound the entire time. 1 minute 40, the pod bay door was sealed. Of course it was, emergency protocol. Dale slammed his access card against the reader. Nothing. The ship's power was failing in sectors. He found the secondary mechanical release under the panel cover, the one described in the pre-departure safety briefing. He had skimmed for 4 minutes while eating a sandwich. He pulled it. The door opened. 1 minute 10, 2 pods, both functional. Dale put the child into the nearer one, got her strapped in, which took 30 seconds because the harness was sized for adults, and he had to improvise with the shoulder webbing. Her deep-water eyes watched him the whole time, not with panic, with attention. He got into the second pod and hit the launch sequence. The pods ejected at the same moment the Terran escort vessel's port section separated and began its slow, irreversible spiral toward the debris field below. Dale's pod tumbled twice, then stabilized. Through the tiny porthole, he watched the fire spread across the wreckage and felt, for a long moment, the specific silence of someone who was alive when they had not expected to be. His earpiece crackled. Base frequency. Emergency response was already tracking the pod signals.
Sorcourt team report.
Dale pressed the transmitter. This is Corporal Rourke. I have the passenger. She is unharmed. We are in the pods. I need someone to tell me who she is and whether I just started an interstellar war by touching her hand. There was a very long pause on the other end of the frequency. Then a different voice came on. Older. Controlled. The kind of controlled that meant someone was working very hard not to sound like what they felt. Corporal, please repeat your last transmission. I have the passenger. She is safe. Who is she? Another pause. Then, Corporal Rourke, the child you recovered is the sole surviving heir to the Ilvari sovereign house. Her name is Liara. She is the Queen's granddaughter. Dale looked out the porthole at the wreckage of the ship he had been on 40 seconds ago. Right, he said. He pressed his burned palm flat against the pod wall and breathed. I'm going to need someone to look at my hand. The recovery team reached them in 11 minutes. 2 Terran medics and 1 Ilvari attendant, who came aboard Dale's pod first, checked his vitals with professional speed, and then stopped and looked at his burned hand and said something in Ilvari that Dale could not understand, but that had the rhythm of someone saying that is going to need attention. The attendant moved to Liara's pod. Dale heard the child's voice for the first time through the thin wall between pods. She spoke in Ilvari, fast and quiet. The attendant responded. There was a pause. Then Liara spoke again, and this time Dale caught one word. He did not know what it meant, but the attendant went still. That stillness told him something. They were brought to a Terran medical station, 3 hours away at standard transit speed. Dale sat in the treatment bay and let the medic work on his hand, while a security officer from the diplomatic corps stood nearby with a tablet and an expression that suggested she had spent the last 3 hours learning things she had not expected to learn today. You were not briefed on the nature of the passenger, she said. It was not a question. No, Dale said. You recovered her without knowing she was Ilvari royalty. I knew she was Ilvari, Dale said. I did not know anything else. Why did you go back for her? Dale looked at his hand. The medic was applying a regenerative wrap that smelled faintly of antiseptic and something chemical. His fingers had blistered badly from the panel work. He would have full function back in 6 to 8 days. The door was jammed, he said. She was on the other side of it. The security officer wrote something on her tablet. Somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed. Dale heard the soft footsteps of someone who moved like they were accustomed to being listened to. He did not look up. He kept his eyes on the medic's work. You are the human who carried my granddaughter out of the fire. He looked up then. The Queen of the Ilvari sovereign house was not what the diplomatic summit footage had suggested. She was tall, yes, silver-skinned, yes. But the footage had not shown the way she stood, which was the way old mountains stand when they have decided to remain. She wore no ceremonial clothing. She wore what looked like a travel suit, gray and functional, and her deep-water eyes were the same color as Liara's. And they were fixed on Dale with an attention that made him feel like he was being read. Dale started to stand. The medic held his wrist. Do not, the Queen said. You are injured. He stayed seated. I am Sovereign Eavara, she said. I have been told what happened on that ship. I have been told by my attendant, and I have been told by Liara herself, which is the account I trust above all others. Dale said nothing. My granddaughter told me that you came to her in the smoke and you crouched down to her level, and you held out your hand and you waited, the Queen said. She said you did not pull her. You did not command her. You waited until she was ready. We were a little short on time, Dale said, but yes. The Queen looked at him for a long moment. The escort team that was supposed to be on that ship, she said. They would have been trained for this assignment. They would have known her rank. They would have treated her with formal protocol. Probably, Dale said. They would have grabbed her, the Queen said simply, because they would have been afraid of failing. Fear makes people grab. You were not afraid. Dale thought about that. He had been very afraid. He had been afraid the entire time. His heart had been hitting his ribs like it was trying to exit through his chest. But he had not grabbed her. I was afraid, he said. I just figured grabbing a scared child was not going to help either of us. The Queen studied him. No, she said. It would not have. She turned to the security officer. I want this man's full record. I want it sent to my ship by the time we reach the station. She turned back to Dale. And I want you to know, Corporal Rourke, that Liara has asked about you twice since we boarded. She asked what happened to your hand. She asked if you would be all right. Dale felt something shift in his chest that he did not have a name for. Tell her I'm fine, he said, and that she has a very good grip. The Queen looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then the corner of her mouth moved, barely, just a fraction, and she turned and walked back down the corridor, and the footsteps faded. And Dale sat in the treatment bay with his burned hand, and the medic's antiseptic smell, and the memory of small, cool fingers closing around his, with the grip of someone who had decided to trust. He leaned his head back against the wall. You know, the medic said quietly, still working on his hand. I think that went well. I have no idea what just happened, Dale said. Yeah, the medic said. Neither do I. But she smiled, the Queen smiled. My supervisor has been stationed here for 11 years, and she says she has never seen that. Dale closed his eyes. Outside the porthole, the stars moved slowly past in their ancient, indifferent way, and the wreckage of the escort ship was already 3 hours behind him. And somewhere down the corridor, a child with deep water eyes was asking if the human with the burned hand was going to be all right. He was, against all odds and contrary to the reasonable expectations of the situation, he was going to be completely fine. The diplomatic incident lasted 6 days. That was how long it took for the Ilvari Sovereign House's Security Council, the Terran Colonial Authority, the 3 independent review boards, and one very unhappy admiral named Carver to agree on what had actually happened and who was responsible for what. Dale spent most of those 6 days in a room on the station that was nicer than any room he had ever been assigned, with food that arrived on a schedule and a view of the transit lanes that was legitimately beautiful at certain hours, and a rotating series of officials who asked him the same questions in different orders with different levels of formality. He answered the same way each time. He told them exactly what happened. He did not add anything. He did not remove anything. He was aware that his answers were being compared across sessions, and he found that he did not mind, because the answers were consistent, because the events had been what they had been. On the 4th day, Captain Rhea Sutton came to see him. She was Dale's commanding officer, a compact woman in her mid-50s with short gray hair and the specific kind of calm that came from having been through enough situations that very few new ones could surprise her. She sat down across from Dale at the room's small table and looked at him for a moment before speaking. How are your hands? She said. Better, Dale said. The regenerative wrap is doing its job. Good. She set a tablet on the table. I want to walk you through what is going to happen. All right. The Ilvari Sovereign House has filed a formal commendation. It has been signed by Sovereign Avara personally. It is the first formal commendation from the Sovereign House to a Terran citizen in 31 years. The last one went to a xenobiologist named Dr. Paul Whitmore, who identified a pathogen in an Ilvari agricultural system before it became a crisis. He received it posthumously. She paused. You are not receiving it posthumously, which we consider a positive development, Dale nodded. The commendation comes with several things, Sutton continued. A formal rank elevation, a transfer to diplomatic escort operations if you want it, and a standing invitation to visit the Ilvari home system, which for context has been extended to fewer than 40 non-Ilvari individuals in recorded history. Dale was quiet for a moment. I went back for a child who was locked in a room, he said. I feel like the response is slightly out of proportion. Sutton looked at him. The child is the heir to the Ilvari succession. If she had died in that ship, the succession dispute would have fractured the Sovereign House. There are 3 factions that have been waiting 20 years for exactly that kind of fracture. We would have been looking at a civil war in Ilvari space, which borders 4 Terran systems. She folded her hands. You did not just save a child. You stabilized a political situation that 2 generations of diplomats have been trying to keep from collapsing. Dale absorbed this. I did not know any of that, he said. No, Sutton said. You did not. And I think that is precisely why it worked. She pushed the tablet across the table. Dale looked at the commendation document. It was written in both Ilvari script and Terran Standard, and the Ilvari script was dense and angular, and made the page look like it was being held up by something structural. At the bottom was the Sovereign House seal, and below it in Terran script the signature, Ivara, Sovereign, House of Ilvar, and below that in smaller script a second signature. The handwriting was uneven. The letters were slightly too large, the way handwriting looks when someone is still learning the proper size and pressure. It was the signature of someone who had only recently learned to write their name on official documents. Liara. Dale stared at the second signature for a long moment. She asked to sign it, Sutton said quietly. The Sovereign's staff said she insisted. They said she told them that her name should be on it because she was there. Dale set the tablet down. He looked at the window. Two cargo ships were moving through the transit lane in slow parallel, their running lights blinking in the patient rhythm of vessels going somewhere that was a long way away. What happens next, he said. That depends on you, Sutton said. You can go back to your previous posting. You can accept the transfer. You can take some leave, which frankly you have earned several times over. What about the Sovereign? She is here for 2 more days. There is a formal reception tomorrow. You have been invited. Dale thought about the Queen standing in the treatment bay doorway, tall and gray-suited and watching him with those deep-water eyes. He thought about her saying, "You were not afraid," with the tone of someone noting something unexpected in data they had been studying for a long time. "What do I wear to a formal Ilvari reception?" he said. Sutton's expression shifted. "Your dress uniform. The Ilvari appreciate military formality at official events." "All right. Also," she said, standing, "they will likely require you to stand for approximately 3 hours. They do not use chairs at formal receptions. It is considered a sign of strength." Dale nodded. "That's fine, and the Sovereign may address you in Ilvari. The translator service will handle it, but there is typically a 1 to 2 second delay, so try not to respond before the translation completes." Understood. Sutton picked up her tablet. She was almost at the door when she stopped. She turned back. "Rourke," she said, "for what it's worth. Every senior officer I have spoken to in the past 4 days has said the same thing. That in your position, under those conditions, with no briefing and no time, the majority of trained personnel would have failed." She paused. "Not because they lacked courage, but because they would have been thinking about the rank of the person in the room you were not." Dale said nothing. "She was just a child who needed help," Sutton said, "and you treated her like one." She left. Dale sat at the table for a while. He picked up the tablet and looked at Liara's signature again. The handwriting was still slightly too large. The letters leaned forward like they were in a hurry to get somewhere. He set the tablet down and looked out at the transit lanes and thought about small, cool fingers and the grip of someone who had decided to trust something, even though everything around them was on fire. The reception hall on the station had been converted for the occasion in ways that were subtle and comprehensive at the same time. The standard overhead lighting had been dimmed and replaced with a warm, low-spectrum illumination that the Ilvari apparently found more comfortable, which has the side effect of making the entire room look like it existed inside a late afternoon in early autumn. The furniture had been rearranged to eliminate chairs, as Sutton had warned. The floor space was open, and the walls had been lined with something that Dale could not identify, a dark material that absorbed sound slightly, so the room had a quality of quiet that was unusual for a space with 40 people in it. Dale arrived in his dress uniform. It was the best version of the uniform, the one that came out for promotions and funerals and official occasions, and he had pressed it himself that morning in the small laundry room down the corridor from his quarters. He was aware, standing at the room's entrance, that he was the only person without either a diplomatic rank or a security designation. Everyone else had titles. Everyone else had briefings. He had been a last-minute replacement for a sick escort team. The Ilvari contingent stood on the far side of the room. There were 12 of them, tall and silver-skinned in ceremonial clothing that was dark and architectural, structured in ways that moved with them when they moved, and stopped moving precisely when they stopped. They were talking among themselves in Ilvari, quiet voices that carried a different frequency than human speech, slightly lower in the resonant register. The Sovereign was at the center of them. She was wearing the same travel suit she had worn in the treatment bay. Dale registered this and then registered that nobody in the room seemed to find it unusual, which meant it was a deliberate choice, which meant something he could not fully decode. Her gaze found him within about 4 seconds of his arrival. He crossed the room because there was nothing else to do. He stopped at the correct distance for a formal greeting, which he had been briefed on that morning by a young diplomatic aide named Connor Webb, who had spent 20 minutes making absolutely certain Dale understood the protocol. Dale inclined his head. "Sovereign Avara," she looked at him. "Corporal Rourke." Her Ilvari was translated by the small device in his ear about 1.5 seconds after she spoke. He waited as Sutton had instructed. "You came," she said. "You invited me," he said. Something in her expression shifted. "I did. I was not entirely certain you would accept. It would have been impolite not to." The Sovereign studied him with that reading quality her gaze carried. "My attendant tells me you have accepted the transfer to diplomatic escort operations. I have." "Why?" Dale considered this honestly. "Because I was apparently very bad at being a standard infantry replacement, and I would prefer to do the job I am doing competently." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Liara asks about you. The captain told me she signed the commendation," she insisted. The Sovereign paused. "She told me something that I have been thinking about since she said it. She told me that when you came into the room and crouched down to her level, she was not afraid of you. She was afraid of everything around you, the fire and the noise and the smoke. But not of you." Dale said nothing. "She is not an easy child to earn that from," the Sovereign said. "She has been raised to be cautious of everyone. It is a necessary part of her position. She has been taught that trust is a resource that runs out." She looked at Dale steadily. "She trusted you inside 30 seconds. She had to," Dale said. "We did not have more time than that." "That is what I thought at first," the Sovereign said. "But she told me something else. She told that she trusted you not because she had to, but because you did not act like someone who needed her to trust you. She said you just held out your hand." Dale was quiet. "That is a rare thing," the Sovereign said. "Among my own people it is rare. Among any people it is rare. The need to be trusted is one of the most powerful corrupting forces I know of. It makes people reach. It makes them demand. It makes them perform rather than simply be." She paused. "You simply were." Across the room, a door opened. The diplomatic aide Connor Webb appeared in it, and beside him, moving with the quick and slightly unsteady energy of someone who was somewhere between determined and nervous, was Liara. She was wearing ceremonial Ilvari clothing. It was dark blue and it matched her eyes, and she had clearly been told to walk calmly, because her walk had the particular quality of someone suppressing the urge to move faster. She found Dale immediately, and her pace did increase, just slightly. And the aide beside her made a small helpless gesture that was universal, for there was nothing I could do. She stopped in front of Dale. She was shorter than he remembered. The pod and the corridor and the smoke had scaled things differently. In a formal room under controlled lighting, she was simply a child who came to his elbow, and who was looking up at him with deep-water eyes and the very specific expression of someone who has something important to say and has been rehearsing it. Dale crouched down. He did it without thinking. He simply dropped to her level the same way he had in the bay, because it was the right distance for talking to someone smaller than you when what you were doing was talking rather than commanding. Her eyes widened very slightly. Then she said something in Ilvara. His earpiece translated it 1.5 seconds later. "Your hand is better." "It is," Dale said. "Thank you for asking." She looked at his hands. He held them out, palms up. The right one still carried the faint pink newness of healed burned tissue along 2 fingers. She reached out and touched it very carefully. One fingertip, the way you test something to confirm it, is real. "Does it hurt?" The translation came. "Not anymore," he said. She looked up at him. Then she said something longer. The translation took 2 seconds. "My grandmother says you are going to work with the diplomatic escort. She says you will be around sometimes. That is the plan," Dale said. Liara looked at him for a moment with those serious, evaluating eyes that were so much like her grandmother's that it was almost startling. Then she held out her hand. Not the way a child offers a hand to be held, the way someone offers a hand to be shaken, a formal gesture, an equal gesture. Dale shook it. Her grip was exactly what he remembered. Behind him, he was aware of a stillness in the room that was different from the ambient quiet of the low-light space. He did not look around. He kept his eyes on Liara, who had a small and very contained expression of satisfaction that she was clearly trying not to show, but was not fully succeeding at hiding. He stood up. The Sovereign was watching them both. Her expression was what it always was, controlled and measuring, but something in the set of it had shifted in a way Dale could not fully read. He would learn to read it over time. He would learn, in the months ahead, that the shift meant something the Ilvari did not have a direct Terran translation for. A word that encompassed right, correct, this is how it should be, and something older underneath all of that. Something closer to relief. But he did not know that yet. He simply stood in the warm, low light of the reception hall and looked at the Sovereign and waited. She inclined her head. It was a formal gesture. Among the Ilvari, he would later learn, it carried a specific weight. It was the gesture used between equals. He inclined his head in return. 3 months later, Dale Rourke was standing in a different kind of room. This one was on Ilver itself. The Ilvari home system was 3 transit jumps from the nearest Terran border station, and the planet itself was larger than Earth by a factor of 1.3, with a gravity that was close enough to standard that the difference registered as a slight heaviness in the chest rather than any actual physical difficulty. The sky was a shade of blue that sat slightly further toward purple than human eyes expected blue to be, and the light had a quality that made everything look like it was being seen through very clean water. The room was in the Sovereign House, not the ceremonial section, the working section, where the actual business of governing a civilization that spanned 9-star systems and had been doing so for 400 years was conducted. The walls were the same dark sound-absorbing material Dale had seen at the station reception, and the table was long and occupied by people who had spent their careers inside decisions that shaped the movement of entire populations. Dale sat at one end of it. He was technically there as a diplomatic escort attaché, which was a designation that had been created approximately 6 weeks ago specifically for his situation. Captain Sutton had forwarded him the relevant paperwork, with a note that said, "This is unprecedented in the literal meaning of the word, which I want you to understand." And he had written back acknowledged and filed the forms. The meeting was about the disputed transit corridor in the Selvar sector, which had been technically unresolved for 19 years, and practically unresolved for longer than that, because the technical resolution had been agreed upon and then not acted on by 3 successive administrations on both sides. The details were dense, and Dale had spent 2 weeks reading briefs that were uniformly written in the specific style of people who had stopped believing the situation was going to change. He was not there to solve the Selvar corridor dispute. He was there because Sovereign Avara had requested a Terran presence at the preliminary talks as a confidence measure, and because the Terran Colonial Authority had agreed, and because the particular Terran presence requested had been Dale. He understood why in a general sense. He was the human who had saved the air. He was the human the Sovereign had inclined her head to. He was a signal, a symbol. The diplomatic corps had briefed him extensively on this aspect of his role, and he had absorbed it and accepted it. Because signal and symbols were real things in rooms like this one, and real things had uses. But he was also paying close attention to the meeting itself. The dispute had 3 core issues. 2 of them were about navigation rights and resource extraction percentages, and they were genuinely complex. The third one was simpler. The third one was about whether both sides believed the other side would honor any agreement they reached. Dale had been in the meeting for 2 hours when he understood that the third issue was the only one that mattered. The first 2 could be solved. They had been solved on paper 19 years ago. The third one was why the paper had not become policy. Neither side trusted the other to follow through. He waited for the appropriate moment, which was when the current speaker finished, and before the next one had quite begun, the small gap that opens informal discussions like a brief window, and he said, in the simplest terms he could find, "Can I ask a question?" The room went quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when something unexpected happens. He looked at the Ilvari lead negotiator, whose name was Advisor Tavrin, and who had been doing this work for 22 years, and EX currently read as someone deciding how to respond to an unexpected variable. "I am reading through the 19-year history of this corridor dispute," Dale said, "and I can see that every agreement reached in that time was technically sufficient. The terms were acceptable to both sides. The issues were resolved in writing." He paused. "Why did the writing not become action?" Tavrin was quiet. The Terran lead negotiator, a woman named Ambassador Lena Graves, had a very controlled expression that still managed to communicate that she was watching this with significant interest. Tavrin said, "Because the action required sustained commitment over time, and the commitment was not sustained." "Why not?" Dale said. Another pause. "Because trust is not established by agreement," Tavrin said carefully. "It is established by behavior over time." "Right," Dale said. "So the real question is not whether we can agree on terms. We can agree on terms. The question is what happens in the 18 months after the agreement, when it becomes inconvenient to honor it, and each side is watching the other side to see who flinches first." Tavrin looked at him. The look had that reading quality that Dale had first encountered in the Sovereign and had since come to understand was an Ilvari assessment mode, a high-attention processing state that they did not bother to hide, because hiding attention was something they considered wasteful. Yes, Tavern said. That is the question. Then that is what we should talk about, Dale said. Not the terms, the enforcement mechanisms. Not what we agree to do, but what happens when someone doesn't. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Ambassador Graves said he's right. And the meeting changed direction. It did not solve the Selvar corridor dispute that day. It did not solve it in the following week. But it moved, for the first time in 19 years, from the category of things that were technically agreed upon and practically static into the category of things that were being actively worked on by people who had identified the real problem. Dale filed his summary report to Sutton that evening from his quarters in the diplomatic residence on Ilvar. He kept the report factual and specific and about 300 words long. He noted the key shift in the meeting's direction and the questions that had produced it. He did not characterize his own role in particularly significant terms. Sutton's response came 8 hours later, accounting for the transit delay. It said, "Well done, and also please stop being modest in official reports because the record needs to reflect what actually happened." He wrote back, acknowledged. He sat at the window of his quarters for a while after that. The Ilvari night outside had a quality of deep purple that was unlike anything he had seen before. The kind of dark that only existed on a world where the atmosphere refracted differently. And the stars through it had a brightness that seemed closer and sharper than they did from any Terran vantage point. A notification appeared on his personal device, not a formal channel. The personal contact address that had been set up by the Sovereign's office, and that Dale had received with a certain careful awareness of what it signified. The message was in Ilvari script with a Terran translation below it. The translation said, "You were in the corridor meeting today. Tavern says you asked the right question. She says it moved the room." Dale looked at the message. He typed back, "I just said seemed obvious." The response came quickly, too quickly for it to be from anyone in the Sovereign's formal communications office. The response said, "That is what grandmother says about you. She says you say obvious things. She says that is why people listen." Dale understood he was talking to Liara. He typed, "How are you doing?" "Good. I am learning saying the secondary transit charts. They are very complicated." "How is your hand?" "Fine," he typed. "Fully healed. Good. Tavern says you will be here for the full session. 6 weeks. That is the current plan," he wrote. There was a pause. Then, "I want to show you the Northern Gardens. They are the best part of the residence. Nobody ever shows visiting humans the Northern Gardens because they only show the formal sections. But the Northern Gardens are where the old trees are, and they are much better than the formal sections." Dale looked at this message for a moment. He typed back, "I would like that very much." The response came, "Good. I will arrange it. Do not let the staff schedule your mornings too full. They will try." He put the device down and looked out at the purple dark Ilvari night. 6 months ago he had been a standby replacement, eating a sandwich during a safety briefing. He had not been briefed. He had not been prepared. He had gone back into a burning ship because a door was jammed and someone was on the other side of it. He thought about what Sutton had said, that he had been thinking about a child who needed help rather than the rank of the person in the room. He had not saved the royal bloodline. He had not stabilized a political succession. He had not done any of the things that the commendation document and the diplomatic briefing and the careful official language described. He had gone back for a frightened kid in a smoky room and held out his hand and waited. Everything else was what happened after that. Outside, one of the large nocturnal birds that lived in the Northern Gardens was calling across the dark, a long clear sound that carried through the Ilvari night, like something that had always been there, like something that had been waiting a very long time to be heard. In 6 weeks, the corridor negotiations would reach a framework agreement, the first one to survive past the signing stage in 19 years. In 8 months, Dale would be assigned permanently to Ilvari Diplomatic Liaison, the first human to hold that role. In 2 years, Liara would show him the Northern Gardens 3 separate times because she would tell him, with complete seriousness, they changed depending on the season, and each version was worth seeing independently. And in 4 years at a formal ceremony in the Great Hall of the Sovereign House, Sovereign Ayavara would stand before the full assembly of Ilvari advisors and Terran diplomatic corps, and speak the words that would travel back across every transit lane to every station and outpost and base where humans lived and worked and watched the stars. She would say, "There is a human us who does not act like a guest. He does not act like an observer or a symbol or an emissary. He acts like someone who understands that the work is the point and the titles are just the paper the work gets written on." She would pause, She would say, "He is one of us." And in the front row, with his fully healed hands in his dress uniform and 4 years of Ilvari sky behind his eyes, Dale Rourke would sit with his hands in his lap and feel the enormous, quiet weight of belonging to something he had never expected to belong to. And he would not say anything, because some things did not need words. Lyara, seated 2 rows back because protocol required it, and she had complained about this to Dale personally, would catch his eye across the room. She would give him a look that communicated very clearly, "I told you so." He would look back at her. He would think about a door that was jammed and a room full of smoke, and a small hand closing around his with the grip of someone who had decided to trust. And he would think, "Yes, you did."